I now give the floor to His Excellency Sergei Aleinik, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Belarus.
Mr. President, for decades, this lofty stage served an important purpose, that is to hold discussions on how to make life on this planet safer and better. Unfortunately, over the last decade, this discussion has not translated into concrete positive action. As a result, global politics has deteriorated. This trend has had a negative impact on all other areas of international relations. But what is the role of the UN in these processes? To serve merely as a stage for discussion? This is the role that many ascribe to it. It was no surprise that the UN is often reproached for its inaction and inability to stop the growing global chaos, to stop the triple crisis in terms of security, food, and energy that has engulfed the entire world. These reproaches, of course, are not entirely fair. The UN is all of us. The UN can only do what it is allowed to do by its member states. On one hand, this is perfectly logical. On the other hand, this logic is fraught with determinism. It implies that the UN is a hostage to external forces and can carry out its mandate effectively only when there are positive changes in its environment. Doesn't that sound familiar to you? This was the same attitude toward the League of Nations before the Second World War. Just a century ago, on the shores of Lake Geneva, many, like us, discussed the threats of their time. However, those discussions had little effect, and the world slid inexorably into the abyss. The League of Nations was consigned to oblivion due to its inutility. The same fate may befall the UN if it remains a passive observer. We believe that the vast majority of member states do not wish to see that outcome. If that is so, then the UN must not wait but act. The organization must work to produce positive changes in external circumstances and ensure peace, stability, and sustainable development on our planet. This is an immense task given the current toxic global politics. However, if we as member states and the reasonable global majority help our organization, then it can rise to that task. The eminent American diplomat George Kennan, when speaking of relations between Soviet Russia and the West a century ago, said, and I quote, "A certain degree of conflict and antagonism exists in any international relations. Therefore, some degree of compromise will always be needed if political communities are to live together on the same planet." End quote. Let us be guided by this sage advice, and despite the high degree of antagonism in the modern international system, seek compromise and agreement. And let us act within the UN. We see several key steps to take. First of all, we must stop the policy of ostracism in the UN. This practice runs counter to the very essence of the organization. After all, according to the UN Charter, all members are equal. Let's treat each other respectfully and equitably. No one should stoop to insults and disrespectful rhetoric, for example, using the word regime to describe legitimate governments of member states. Similarly, certain countries should refrain from trying to restrict the participation of other member states in the work of the UN. These actions are a direct violation of the UN Charter. In addition, the entire history of multilateral diplomacy tells us that a positive outcome is possible only through inclusiveness and cooperation. Secondly, certain member states must cease their attempts to turn the UN and its entities into a tool serving their foreign policy. Politicizing the UN only discredits it in the eyes of ordinary people on our planet. After all, the UN was created for cooperation in the interests of people, not for settling scores between states. We believe that bilateral issues should not be dragged into international organizations as an apple of discord. Thirdly, we can and should work successfully in the UN on common challenges. Therefore, we should approach these issues in order of difficulty. The most difficult issues, of course, are those relating to security. We could call them first-tier problems. These are the problems that are the most dangerous, even explosive, an explosive apple of discord in global policy. The other issues could be called second tier, for example, combating climate change, transnational crime, pandemics, and diseases, and they are easier to resolve. All of the world's countries suffer equally from their impact, and all are equally interested in finding effective solutions. So let us work actively in these areas. Ordinary people expect results throughout the planet. I'll give you a very revealing example of how we can work together successfully despite our acute disagreements on the political level. At the 32nd session of the UN Commission on Crime Prevention in Vienna in May, Belarus initiated a draft resolution on combating trafficking of persons in supply chains. At first, the countries of the West, for political reasons, opposed our initiative. However, once they engaged in the negotiation process, they understood the importance of the initiative and began to work toward a positive outcome. The resolution was adopted by consensus, and all parties involved began to implement it. Let us use that same approach toward all other second-tier problems. In particular, we hope to see that constructive approach at this session on Belarus's biannual resolution on strengthening coordination of efforts to combat trafficking of persons. However, we are especially in need of common sense when it comes to resolving the global food crisis. Let us assume that there is enough food in the world for all of us. At the same time, millions of people are going hungry. This contradiction is the outcome of unilateral, illegal sanctions, which Western states have imposed in violation of the UN Charter against countries that are not desirable to them or in order to obtain a competitive economic advantage. Sanctions limit the export of food and fertilizer to developing countries, which need them most of all. Therefore, the global food crisis is man-made, not systemic. As such, it is easy to resolve. All we have to do is lift these illegal barriers. The countries that have set up these obstacles ought to remove them. This is true not only of global food security, it's also true of all other areas in international life. Unilateral coercive measures imposed by the West, directly or indirectly against virtually all other states in the world, must be immediately removed. And this is something demanded by common sense as well as the common interests of all people on the planet. We believe that progress in resolving second-tier problems within the UN will help us to build a base of mutual trust for joint and productive work on security issues. In this area, we're seeing a power shift from the West to the rest of the world. These shifts in history have often been accompanied by wars. However, it is within our power to keep this process on a peaceful track. The best way to do so is to expand permanent membership in the UN Security Council. The Council does not reflect today's geopolitical realities. 3 of its 5 permanent members represent the West. They are not interested in changing the world's status quo. As a consequence, the Council does not fulfill its functions to support international peace and security. Only a more representative and democratic body can cope with that task. Therefore, the expansion of permanent membership in the Security Council to include major developing countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, that is an imperative of our time. We are pleased that China and Russia support this reform of the Council, as they have stated repeatedly. We call on the other 3 permanent members of the Security Council to acknowledge this new reality and to agree to incorporate it into a reformed body. Mr. President, the President of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, in 2017 had initiated the launch of a global security dialogue. This initiative was an attempt to prevent a negative spiral in global politics. Unfortunately, certain key actors refused to heed this reasonable appeal. As a result, security architecture in Europe broke down. But it's never too late to do the right thing. If we all want to make life on this planet safer and better, as we constantly say at this podium, then we have no other choice other than dialogue and talking to each other. The head of the Belarusian state has repeatedly emphasized the importance of holding this kind of dialogue in the spirit of San Francisco. Indeed, the San Francisco Conference has breathed life into our organization and has given hope for a better future to the entire world. We need that same hope today. We believe that the UN is the right platform that can allow this initiative to become a reality. One contribution to the global dialogue process, we believe, is the International Conference on Eurasian Security, Reality and Prospects, which Belarus will be hosting in Minsk on October 26th, 27th of this year. Mr. President, Belarus cannot fail to mention the topic of the conflict in the neighboring country of Ukraine. It's very painful for us to see how this people so close to us have been suffering for 1.5 years already. Unfortunately, Ukraine and its people have become a pawn in the great game of the West to preserve its own global hegemony. It's clear that by increasing weapons deliveries to this country, the West is determined to continue the war down to the last Ukrainian. But does Ukraine want this? Do Ukrainians need this war of attrition? We believe the answer is no. Belarus, for its part, has always supported peace in this neighboring country and has taken all possible measures in this regard. As stated by the President of Belarus, we continue to be prepared to do everything in our power to this end. Thank you.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Belarus.